Yes, we do have a special program this evening for the MS4, and Commissioner Terrell will make the introduction. The floor is yours, Commissioner. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening. As you know, Middletown, City of Middletown is MS4 community, which means that we have to provide education material for our residents, for our contractors, for our public, and in order to bring this important program that is monitored by EPA and DEC and the City of Middletown to the forefront, so that people are aware of the environment and what happens when there is any pollution that goes into the stream. In that effort, we're happy to have Kevin Sumner tonight. He's the Conservation District Manager for Orange County's Soil and Water Conservation District. And Kevin has been in the forefront really of these efforts in there. He's very conscientious and he's one of the watchful eyes in here for the county and really for all of us on our streams. And he's been very constructive in green projects, green initiatives. And I'm very happy to have him in here in order to shed some light on this important program. And with that, I will turn it over to Kevin. I'll sit next to you to read some.
New items to cover in there, but I guess we can all use a refresher on this stuff. And so we'll start out just by describing the reason why we're concerned about stormwater. When it flows over the land, it picks up litter, sediment, and whatever happens to accumulate on those impervious surfaces, and those materials can get into our water supply and our surface waters. And it's not even just the material that's in the runoff, it's the runoff itself that has impacts on our streams, and we'll cover some of that a little bit more. But traditionally, the engineering paradigm has been that we want to get rid of the water as quickly as possible. And now over time we've learned that that may not be the best thing to do. So we've kind of gone full circle now to where we want to try to deal with the water on every development site, so that we're not sending any more water off the site than what was leaving the site before we got there. So that's the goal. And so again, the MS4, certain communities that have certain density of population actually have to get a permit from the state of New York in order to discharge their stormwater, and they're then required to do a number of other measures. So the MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. That means a community where your sanitary waste is handled in an entirely different system than your stormwater is. So that's the case in Middletown, and that's why the city is considered an MS4 community. So this map shows you what portions of the county are impacted by this MS4 program, and it does touch a lot of the towns. So even if you have a little bit of that area in your town, you still have to put this program in place essentially for the whole town. And actually some additional areas have been added. The village of Goshen and town of Goshen is now in the MS4 program as well. So you can see the more urbanized areas to the eastern side of the county are more affected than the rural areas to the west. In our water resource planning, we tend to approach things from what we call a watershed standpoint. So this map just shows you some of the major watersheds in the county of Orange, the biggest one being the Wallkill River that traverses the center of the county flowing north. And the Monhegan Brook watershed, which encompasses most of the city of Middletown, is actually a tributary within the Wallkill. So apart from just a little bit of the city on the northeastern edge there that drains to Wawayanda Creek, the whole city of Middletown is in the Monhegan Creek watershed. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end tonight about a recent initiative that we have where we're going to try to develop a plan for the Monhegan Brook. So this MS4 program has 6 main components, And what we're doing here tonight is helping the city to satisfy that item 1, public education and outreach. So it's, I think, was a good move that the state, in addition to requiring communities to actually do work on the ground and more closely regulate development, that they also have to undertake a public education program, because we all contribute to these water pollution problems, so we all have to try to be part of the solution. And even going beyond the education, the state wants communities to try to involve the community in environmental protection efforts and projects, and we'll describe a few tonight that we've been working with the city on. So then the other items are making sure that we address construction site runoff control. That's perhaps a little bit less of an issue for the city because you're mostly built out now, but in the towns where they have a lot of open land, this is a huge issue. And after those raw land areas are developed, we then need to put in what we call post-construction runoff controls so that the stormwater coming off of those sites after it's developed is still not impacting our water resources. We also have to do, communities have to do a pollution prevention program, which mainly involves things like making sure that we take care of runoff from municipal operations, from garages, from street catch basin maintenance and things of that nature. Item 3 I failed to discuss earlier, but the illicit discharge program basically requires all the MS4 communities to map all their stormwater outfalls, and then to have a program in place where they're checking those on a periodic basis to make sure that there's no discharges into your stormwater system that aren't supposed to be going in there, such as from a septic leach field or a sewage line or something of that nature. So as I go through some of the slides, I'll highlight how some of these address some of those 6 minimum measures. And this is one that the city did several years ago, placing these storm drain markers around on the catch basins just to remind people that we don't want to dump in those catch basins. Some people have the mistaken belief that water that goes into these catch basins goes to some kind of a treatment plant, and it doesn't. It goes directly to our streams and rivers. So it's just a reminder to people to be careful about what they put down the storm drain. This is an example of an outfall map that's part of that illicit discharge measure that we talked about. Pretty complicated to do for areas where your storm drainage is entirely buried underground, but the engineers had to determine what size pipes were coming into those main drainage culverts, and to put a program in place so that we have some ability to check the flows. And one of the red flags with a stormwater system is if you have water coming out of a pipe during dry periods, that's suspect, because these drains really ought to be running only when it rains. So if you see a storm drain that has water coming out of it in a dry period, that's something that needs to often be checked out. This is an example of checking an outfall. That device that's laying in that pipe is actually something that could detect optical brighteners that are in detergents. It's just a piece of cotton basically that lays in that drain for a period of time. Put that under a UV light, and if those detergents are in there, then it shows up. So that's kind of an indicator that if there's water coming from a drain that has a washing machine discharge, then that's something that could indicate sewage and would need to be followed up on. So the state of New York periodically will check all the streams, and they'll also accept information from the public if it's credible, and they develop a list called the Priority Water Bodies List. And these are some of the water bodies that are on that list with various impacts. And you'll see that there are 4 that are in the impaired category, and Monhegan Brook is one of those. And that's cause for concern, because in some of these cases where the state deems a water body to be impaired, they will ask or require the community to come up with a program to address that impairment. So this is something that we're working with the Public Works Department on, to actually verify or determine if the information that the state has about Monhegan Brook is actually correct. They believe that it's phosphorus impaired, and that's a pretty difficult measure to actually document with chemical testing. So we're working closely with the city to see if we can get better data on the actual condition of Monhegan Brook. This chart just shows some of the impairments of the streams in Orange County. Historically, they were more related to agriculture, but as our land development patterns have changed, a lot more of the impacts now are coming from what we call urban runoff. These are just a couple of slides of the Monhegan Brook as it passes through the city. These two are up on West Main Street, one of them looking upstream towards the new school complex. And that stream corridor actually doesn't look too bad, although there is a parking area on the left. So the slide in the bottom there is looking downstream, and you do see some erosion on the bank there. One of the things that we look for ideally with streams is to have natural cover on both sides of the stream. This is often difficult in urban streams, but it's something that we can sometimes have some influence on. So we would be looking for trees next to the stream, and hopefully no parking lots or impervious areas that come too close. And we're actually doing some projects to reestablish some of these riparian areas, and I'll show you some slides of those as we move along here. This is Monhegan Brook in the upper left there, looking upstream from Fulton Street. Actually, not a bad looking little section of the stream corridor there with trees on both sides and stable banks. And then in the bottom, looking downstream, where, as most of you probably know, Monhegan Brook then goes underground under Fulton Street. And this is where it comes out off of Genung Street. Again, not too bad of a stream channel there in the bottom, although there is that parking lot on the left that would be shedding some runoff into the stream. And we have to remember that the tributaries are important too. So it's not just the main channel. Whatever is getting delivered to the Monhegan Brook from the side streams is impacting its water quality too. And the bottom right there is a little tributary off of Dolson Avenue that, you know, sometimes we see these things and we just think of it as a drainage ditch, and we don't think of it as something that needs to be protected. But we have to remember that all these waterways lead to the larger waterways, and all need to be protected as much as possible. The top left is behind Campbell Plaza, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the projects that we're doing with the plaza in the city to try to improve the brook a little bit behind the plaza there. So I'm just going to quickly show you some of the issues on construction sites, which, as I said, maybe, thank you, less of an issue with the city. But these are the kind of things that you see with uncontrolled construction sites. Silty runoff getting into the catch basins, and a lot of times these sites get opened up and left open for a long time, and then every storm they're generating more sediment. So yeah, I'd get in trouble for some of the slides I put up if somebody recognizes them, so we try to take out the buildings with the names on the front. But so as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the pollutants in the runoff, it's also the extra water itself. And we found that when streams, when the watershed gets to a level where about 10% of it is impervious, we actually see impacts on the receiving waters. So in a natural watershed, we would expect to see a stream, something like that, but then as the imperviousness goes up, you start to get unstable banks, and often the only way to stabilize the stream is by paving it, which obviously isn't healthy for the stream. So these are some of the things that we try to avoid. So in addition to trying to avoid that extra water, we also need to address the pollutants that collect on the surface of the impervious areas. And we'll talk about some of the ways we do that. These are just some of the measures that we would use on construction sites to control runoff, and they have to be installed properly, or you get this. If you try to use the wrong practice in the wrong place, then it does more damage than good. This is what it's supposed to do. A silt fence is supposed to collect sediment. So, and we emphasize the use of grass. Sometimes the simple solution is the best one. Grass is cheap and it's very effective at controlling erosion. It just takes time to get established. So the old technology that we used to use for stormwater runoff was just to collect it in a big pond and then make it take its time exiting from that pond. It was effective for flood control, but kind of unsightly and really didn't do anything for water quality. So now what we try to do, the new standards, is that we have a permanent pond there that actually has the ability to filter that water in, as the storm runoff enters and leaves it. So it's controlling flooding, and it's also improving water quality. And we're always evolving. More recently, we've started to learn that even when we do those wet ponds that have the permanent pools, there's still some impacts in terms of eliminating some of the recharge that used to go into the groundwater. In a natural setting, about half of the rainfall goes into the ground, and in a highly developed setting, that number drops to 20%. So our new, what we call green infrastructure and runoff reduction standards, are intended to get us back to where we're not robbing that groundwater recharge, which we need. Many communities in the county rely on for drinking. So we don't want to really be robbing that groundwater recharge. Kind of the old way of building parking lot islands was to have them elevated, and then the water would go into storm drains next to the island. What we're moving towards now is parking lot islands that are depressed, and the storm water goes through curb cuts into these areas and soaks back into the ground. So this is one way that we can help to recharge that groundwater. And when you get too much water for the ground to soak up, then it passes into the catch basin. So we expect to start seeing more of these on new development. And there are lots of other ways to get stormwater back in the ground, such as these pervious pavers that have lots of open area backfilled with sand, where it can still be a trafficable surface, but will put water back into the ground. We've done a number of demonstration projects around the county and around Middletown. This is one that was installed at SUNY Orange, next to the Alumni Green. It's called a rain garden, where it takes the water from the parking lot or the walking asphalt areas, and it puts it into a basin that looks like it's supposed to be there and fits in with the landscaping, but it collects that storm water and allows it to filter back into the ground. So this is something we probably should have thought of a long time ago. We should make our storm water look like it's supposed to be there, not look like a sore thumb like some of those early generation detention basins did. Not always possible, but when you can, we had the assistance of Cornell Master Gardeners and some of the horticulture folks at SUNY Orange to make this rain garden fit right in with the landscaping scheme at the college there. So this is our goal. We built one up at the Cooperative Extension offices on Seward Avenue. The soils there were pretty poor. A lot of engineers and planners used to tell us that rain gardens wouldn't work in Orange County because of our soils, because they're too tight. And we have not found that. We've found that most of our rain gardens drain out faster than we expected them to. But sometimes we do have to amend the soil and put better material back in there to make sure that it doesn't pond water for too long of a period. Some public participation activities that go back and help you with some of your MS4 requirements. We've done some Trees for Tribs programs. This one is up on the community campus that we did a couple years ago. And this one was just done this past May on the Middletown school campus and across the street on the private property there off of County Route 78. And we had some help from some SUNY New Paltz students and managed to plant 260 trees and shrubs there. So hopefully in 10 or 15 years you'll ride by there and see something that's starting to look like a forest. Some other public outreach activities. We did manage to get a small grant from the state of New York to work on the Monhegan Brook, specifically in the Campbell Plaza section there. So we worked with the city and ShopRite and a number of other partners, and we had a display in the ShopRite lobby and asked people to come out and help us with a stream cleanup, which we did on April 25th, and I have to be honest, admit I was in Hilton Head when this happened, but Jacob was there. I think he brought some help with you, and we had a pretty good turnout. We had about 30 people, and quite a bit of garbage was collected, shopping carts, tires, and the city was kind enough to dispose of that material for us. Unfortunately, it now kind of looks kind of like it did before we started, so we're going to try to stay on that, and if we could make that an annual event, maybe we can start to help that situation a little bit. This is behind the plaza there, and you can see the condition of the stream bank, the pavement right up to the top of the bank. This is something that has happened in urban areas for a long time, and it's often difficult to go in there and fix that now. But we are going to try. We're going to do a rain garden practice behind the shop right there that's going to look more linear than the other ones I showed you because we have so little room to work with. But sometimes you don't need a lot of room, and we can protect the stream a little bit and protect the plaza's parking lot as well, which is being threatened to fall into the stream now. So these are what we call retrofits, and some of the communities that have these impaired water bodies, the state actually makes them develop and implement a retrofit plan. So that has not happened for the city of Middletown, but if we want to be proactive, then we look for sites like this, we look for funding, and we try to do what we can with what limited funding there is to address some of these problem areas. This past summer, we worked very closely with the city and with a consulting firm in Warwick, Lehman and Getz to apply for $1 million from the Green Innovations Grants Program. Unfortunately, our project did not get funded, but we accomplished a lot just by studying this parking lot as well as the Orchard Street proposed parking lot, and coming up with some plans that are on the shelf now to put a green infrastructure type parking lots in these facilities. So we will be revamping that proposal and trying to resubmit it this summer. So we're hopeful that we will be able to still secure that funding, and this will go a long way towards the city actually being very proactive in terms of applying practices like this that they aren't required to do, but do help you to show the state that you're serious about implementing your MS4 program. So it's a little difficult to see just from this schematic, but the parking lot would use a number of different practices, including pervious pavement that will, again, allow that water to get back into the ground, as well as rain garden practices built into the parking lot islands, and some tree pit practices where there'll be nice street trees, but they're actually planted into a vault that has a certain kind of planting medium in it, where the street runoff can go in there and actually irrigate that tree and filter the stormwater at the same time. So if we are able to secure this funding, it'll be a very innovative project. And finally, I just wanted to mention for a few minutes that that we are in the early stages of starting a watershed planning initiative for the Monhegan Brook. The brook has, we talked about the imperviousness, and if you get over 10%, you start to see stream impacts. The imperviousness in the Monhegan watershed is a little over 12%. So that's a concern from a watershed management standpoint. And even though it's a small watershed, there's 4 communities that we would be dealing with there, including the city, the town of Wawayanda, town of Walk Hill, and a little bit of Goshen over there, I think. So, okay, so back in 2007, our office spearheaded a watershed plan for the whole Walk Hill watershed. That's 785 square miles. The plan is still referred to, But that large of an area, it's almost impossible to do a very detailed plan. So we've moved now towards trying to do watershed plans on these sub-watershed areas. And the Monhegan's a really good size for us to be able to do a very thorough plan. So we'll be looking to the city to be an active partner in the development of that plan. If we don't have the communities that encompass the watershed involved in the process and bought into it, then the risk is that that just becomes a plan that sits on a shelf. So I was glad to be able to have the opportunity tonight to let you all know that this is coming down the pike and that we're really looking forward to having the city be an active partner with us on that. So that's all I have, unless you have some questions.
Yeah, Kevin, the tributaries, like you said, the drain, we think of them as streams, but a lot of them are just open drains going in. Who should be responsible for maintaining those? From garbage and litter and eroded banks?
Well, I don't know if this applies directly to your question, but related. We get a lot of calls from people that want to know who's responsible for the stream, who's responsible to stop it from flooding, who's responsible to pull the tree out of it, things like that. And the answer is nobody, really. I mean,
Well, maybe responsible is a bad word.
Yeah.
As part of a program, should the city, where we have easements, go in and do a maintenance plan and clean up of these things, or
well,
is that something that will assist us in this whole?
oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In terms of litter and things like that, I mean, one of the things you got to be careful is about, there's sometimes a perception that making it look neat is making it better. For example, people like to mow right up to the top of the bank of the stream so that they have a nice view. But actually, weeds growing up and trees growing up is better for the stream. So if it's serving a drainage function, then it has to be maintained for capacity. You know, if a tree falls in it, you have to take it out. But we don't necessarily want to clean groom the banks of the stream, but keeping them maintained in terms of maintaining their drainage capacity and keeping them cleaned up from garbage is certainly something that we proactively would want to do. And, you know, we're going to try to use the brook behind Campbell Plaza as a sort of an example for that. That's going to be, I don't think that's a lot of litter that people just throw there. I just think
Washed in.
it's, you know, it blows out of the dumpsters and
Right.
things like that. But, you know, we can get people, I think a lot of people do want to get involved if you give them the opportunity. It takes a lot of work to get the word out there and to keep the momentum up. But I think we can get the public more involved in some of those cleanup activities.
Are you going to have any, you talked about collecting data for testing. When is that going to start?
Well, we're going to try to incorporate that into that watershed plan that I talked about. As I said, testing for phosphorus is really difficult. You need special equipment to do it. And the state listing it as being phosphorus impaired is based on some methods that they use looking at macroinvertebrates in the stream, so they kind of surmise that it's phosphorus impaired, but they don't really have any chemical data to prove that. So I think Jacob and I both agree that we would like to know what's in there and how much is in there in a, you know, with more reliable data. So we have some of the SUNY biology professors involved, and we have a little bit of a budget in the watershed plan, and we're going to try to do the program where we do some phosphorus grab sampling and at least get some idea whether in fact it is in there at the levels that would cause an impairment. To do a really thorough scientific study on that would be extremely expensive. We're just going to try to scratch the surface a little bit.
If I may just say something quick about the impairment of the Monhegan Brook. When I started with this in here, I started looking. They say the Monhegan Brook is an impaired body of water, tabled and tagged by DEC and all that. So I started asking questions. Why is it impaired? Why is it impaired water body? And really, there wasn't any clear answer for us. So I reached out to Kevin, and Kevin, he started calling the DEC until we got some answers. And the phosphorus, it doesn't come to. It comes from agricultural land. We don't have any agricultural land. That means it's coming from outside the city. So that's something to be, and we are collecting data ourselves We take samples of the stream and all that stuff, not to the level of sophistication that Kevin was talking about, but we're monitoring for nitrate, for BOD, for all kinds of other variables in there to monitor the health of the Manhagan Brook. So we're working on that, and we're going to continue to work with Kevin on that, because I just don't like the name, the tag in there on the Manhagan Brook being impaired without really wrapping our arms around it. Why is it impaired, and what can we do to help? Thank you very much, Kevin. Good job.
Alderman
I
Johnson?
just had one other question with respect to the phosphorus. So if it was documented that there's too much, is remediation going to be to alleviate the source, or is there a way to treat the water on an intermittent basis, or how do you, only by source?
Source control.
Okay, that's it.
And there are some communities in the east of Hudson watershed that have retrofit plans where they have something called a total maximum daily load. The state actually determines how much phosphorus they want to allow to be going into the stream, and then they try to get the community to control the sources down to that level. So that can get very expensive and also very difficult to accurately measure. So it's clearly something that we would want to avoid if we can.
And if the source is outside our municipality, how does that proceed jurisdictionally? Is that through the DEC, or?
Well, if they establish what they call a TMDL for the Manhagan, then all the communities in the watershed would be affected by that. Of course, Middletown can't compel upstream communities to do anything, so
Right.
you would mainly be just responsible for a retrofit program within the city.
Well, that doesn't sound very fair. Thank you.
Kevin, can I just quickly ask, what is the state test, is the state testing this water? How regularly do they test it, and what do they test for?
They have a rotating, what they call rotating basin plan. They don't have enough staff, so they go around the state and they try to get to each major drainage basin every 5 years. But just because of their limited staff, they have to do kind of testing that's just if it indicates an early problem, then they'll do more chemical testing. But most of their testing is initially just this macroinvertebrate testing, where any trout fisherman would be familiar with mayflies or caddisflies, stoneflies. These are sensitive bugs, and if they don't find them in the stream, then that's a red flag where they would go and look closer. But a lot of their data for Manhagan Brook is based on these macroinvertebrate studies, not on actual taking a sample and taking it to the lab and say it has this much phosphorus in it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.